Today is the feast day of Blessed Basil Moreau, the founder of the Congregation of Holy Cross. And so as a family of Holy Cross, we celebrate worldwide this day. We celebrate our founder and the courageous mission that was started and has continued now nearly 200 years later. So we welcome you tonight to this January edition of the Holy Cross Institute webinar. As you're coming in, as usual, I can see the numbers growing. We always love to see who you are, where you're from. So please tell us, use your chat. You'll be using your chat for any questions you might have tonight, but use the chat feature to let us know who you are and where you're from. And we're going to give it all a few minutes and we'll get started. We've got a lot to share with you tonight. So thank you for being with us for this January issue of the Holy Cross Institute webinar. Of course, we want to welcome in a special way our friends from Gilmore Academy, whose colleague, Dr. Jimmy Menkhaus, is our speaker tonight. So thank you all for joining in. I can see we've got folks on tonight from Lexington, Kentucky, and from Ventura, California. Thank you, Sister Patricia. And from Gilmore. So Brother Ken Kane and Whitney Daly, thank you both for being on. Greg Metzger coming to us from San Gabriel, California. Thank you for being on tonight. And again, as these numbers grow, we've got our friends from St. Francis High School in Mountain View. Elisa, thank you. Mike Truesdale, the president from Holy Cross High School in New York City, in Flushing, New York. Welcome tonight. Looks like we have another person from California, from Huntington Beach, maybe. California, thank you for being with us. Austin, Texas. We have someone coming to us from Sydney. So thank you. It looks like coming from a Jesuit school in Sydney. So thank you for joining us this evening. Terrific to have everybody with us. Yes, Huntington Beach, California. Thank you. Again, a very special day for those of us in the family of Holy Cross as we celebrate the feast day of our founder, Blessed Basil Moreau, who we'll talk a little bit more about tonight, and whose inspiration is the title of this evening's program, Making God Known, Loved, and Served. So in this celebration of Blessed Basil Moreau, it's appropriate tonight that we'll hear from a teacher in a Holy Cross school here in the United States at Gilmore Academy in Ohio, who also is an adjunct lecturer at John Carroll University and the author of the book you see on your screen there, Immersion, A Pilgrimage into Service. So we welcome all of you. It looks like we have Brother Adolph from San Antonio, Brother John Page from San Antonio, Texas. Thank you all for being on tonight. Looks like we have as well Kathy Kenny, head of school at Gilmore Academy. Really a special welcome to all of our friends in the Gilmore Academy community. How proud you must be to see one of your colleagues featured tonight in this webinar. Gail Marie from Notre Dame College Prep in Niles, Illinois. Thank you so much for joining us. Ed O'Connell coming to us from Litchfield, Connecticut. Thank you, Ed. Always grateful that for your participation each month. So we're right at the hour. We're going to go ahead and get started with you tonight. Again, we welcome you to the webinar series for the Holy Cross Institute, which we began, frankly, as an inspiration to celebrate the 200th anniversary a year ago of the founding of the Brothers of St. Joseph, who in 1837 came together with Blessed Basil Moreau to form and create the Congregation of Holy Cross, what we know today as the Congregation of Holy Cross. And founded initially in the identity and has always remained in the identity of the Holy Family. The early Congregation of Holy Cross was composed of brothers, sisters, and priests, and we're blessed as a family of Holy Cross. That is, that has expanded. We all can, whether we come from Holy Cross brothers, the priests, and the Congregation of Holy Cross, or sisters from the Sisters of the Holy Cross, Sisters of Holy Cross, or the Maronite Sisters of Holy Cross, we can trace our roots back to our founder, Blessed Basil Moreau. So we welcome you tonight on the feast day of Blessed Basil Moreau. Next slide, please. And usually for our webinars, I like to close the webinar with a Moreau quote, but tonight we're going to open with it since this is the celebration of our founder. And this one, again, is one that I think really resonates, certainly with me. And in the troubled times of post-revolution France that Moreau was living in, and the young brothers of St. Joseph and the young sisters, as they went out into the towns and villages, they utilized this tool of Christian education, which would seek to be a source of renewal, or as Blessed Basil Moreau said, a work of resurrection, a liberation from the darkness of ignorance, a vehicle for the transformation of society, and a process that helps to make all things, especially the persons engaged in it, new. And that includes each and every one of us. And of course, on the right, you see the word spes unica from our motto, Ave Crux Spes Unica, hail the cross, our only hope. And so in those troubled times of post-revolution France, we see our own troubled times today, certainly with death and division and disease. We certainly see political polarization, we see racial injustice, and we see terrible despair. And again, what we have a chance to offer through Catholic education is that source of renewal, that work of resurrection, as we seek ourselves to prepare the students that we have the opportunity to accompany, the great privilege to accompany, to themselves being transformed, and so that they can be transformational agents of change in society. So it's the renewal of church and society. The Holy Cross Institute is founded at St. Edward's University, represents, I think, as many of you know, a unique collaboration, partnership between the Moreau province, the Midwest province of brothers, they're the provinces of brothers here in the United States, and then as well St. Edward's University. Next slide, please. And what we do through our programs is we seek to provide what we refer to as the IFT pedagogical model of information, formation, and transformation. So through our programs, through our research, through our publications, through the conferences that we do, the prayer services, the workshops, the professional services and training we offer. Ultimately, it's focused with intentionality on the formation of Holy Cross educators to continue that legacy of Blessed Basil Moreau and the founders, the pioneers of Holy Cross education. We always invite you to follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, our YouTube channel, where this recording will be posted sometime tomorrow. It'll also be emailed to each of you. We also invite you to download our free app, the Daily Moreau app, which is a daily prayer app. You can see it in the bottom left-hand corner. You can get it on the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store. And as you just saw up here in your chat, if you're interested in signing up for our free monthly newsletter and to learn more about the programs available at the Holy Cross Institute, you can click on that link. Next slide, please. As we talk about the service, the growth of Holy Cross worldwide, what began very humble beginnings in central France and Le Mans, France, expanded very quickly from our original foundings in 1837 to 1841, where as an apostolic missionary order, young men were being sent all over the world, and that included coming across the ocean here to the United States, the young United States, for the initial founding of Holy Cross College and the University of Notre Dame. What has expanded today to see 28 schools on your screen. Some of those are sponsored by brothers provinces. Some are parish schools that are run, parishes that are run by Holy Cross priests. Some of these are Sisters of the Holy Cross schools and Maronite Sisters of Holy Cross. And so today there are 28 schools in the United States, 8 colleges and universities, and 120 schools, colleges, and universities around the world in 21 countries that bear the family name of Holy Cross. Next slide. And so to get us started tonight, I've invited my assistant director for the Holy Cross Institute, Meg Sturgeon, to lead us in this prayer, which he wrote specifically for today, this feast day of Blessed Basil Moreau.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much, Marco, for that introduction. What a wonderful evening to have this webinar. It happens to be, as Marco mentioned, the feast day of our founder of Holy Cross, Father Moreau. So in his honor, we have a prayer written, and we'll go ahead and begin this evening in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Blessed Father Moreau, in founding the Congregation of Holy Cross, you established a community filled with zeal for the gospel and the salvation of souls. You understood that salvation entailed the resurrection of the human person, even here and now. And so you founded a holy institute committed to good works that would bring hope and new life to the vulnerable, impoverished, and forgotten. Among your ministries, you were especially committed to the education of youth. As a teacher yourself, you knew well the blight of ignorance and the death it could bring if left untreated. You understood its remedy to be compassionate accompaniment, careful instruction in the Christian faith, and the thoughtful cultivation of worldly wisdom. Filled with fervor and a desire to follow the example of Jesus, you and the family of Holy Cross set out to educate hearts and minds around the world. In so doing, you faced many trials and bore heavy crosses, and yet you strove forward as men and women with hope. In all things, you sought the imitation of Christ, who lived with zeal, led with grace, served with humility, taught with gentleness, suffered with patience, and died with hope. With him, you understood the sole purpose of life to be the selfless service of others and the glorification of the Holy One. With him, you trusted wholeheartedly in divine providence, commending yourself and your plans to the gracious will of the Father. With him, you saw the cross not as the triumph of death or the symbol of defeat, but as the threshold of resurrection and the vehicle of the victory of God. With you, we hail the cross as our only hope. We strive in all things to imitate the Lord, and we acknowledge that whoever has Jesus Christ has everything. Blessed Father Moreau, on this day on which we commemorate your glorious passage into eternal life, we humbly implore your intercession for the Church, for the Congregation of Holy Cross, for all priests, brothers, and sisters, and especially for Christian educators and the students whom they serve. May we follow in your footsteps by taking up daily the works of resurrection that infuse hope and breathe new life into the world. Grant that we, who are inspired by your example and strengthened by your prayers, might have the competence to see the urgent needs of the world and the courage to act upon them. In doing so, may we always remain disciples with hope to bring. Help us to see all things with the eyes of faith, that we might recognize always the greatness of our God-given mission and the wonderful amount of good that we can accomplish for the kingdom. Blessed Father Moreau, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen.
Fantastic, Megs. Thank you very much again for the time, for the discernment, for the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. Each time as you write these original prayers and share them with the community. Tonight's also special because we're joined by our co-hosts and co-sponsors of the evening, New City Press. And you'll hear in a moment from the folks at New City Press. They are the publishers of Dr. Menkhouse's book that we're going to be discussing tonight. So thank you to New City Press for your partnership. We look forward to growing together as we continue to collaborate in the future. Next slide. And New City Press has been kind enough this evening to offer a 25% discount on the purchase of this book using the code Holy Cross. We'll come back to that a little bit later on. This code is valid until February the 18th. Next slide. And then, of course, the programs that the Holy Cross Institute offers, by the way, are all done with no fees charged to participants. And so it's really through the generosity of donors and benefactors, the support of foundations, and corporate support from sponsors like New City Press and others that help to make all of this possible. So if you know of somebody who would be willing to help, they believe in what we do, or can support and assist us, then they can certainly contact me, or you can certainly contact me. My email address is there on the screen. Next slide. And so with that, we're going to go ahead and turn it over to Greg Metzger from New City Press. Greg?
Thanks, Marco, so much. We're so really honored to be able to be a co-sponsor tonight with Holy Cross, and especially for this opportunity to introduce people to the work of Jimmy Menkhouse. And so I just wanted to take a moment. You did a great job of really introducing New City Press, but I thought I might just mention that New City Press grows out of the Focolare movement, and the Holy Cross that you spoke in, that the prayer was really so movingly evoked, really was a deep part of the spirituality of the Focolare movement, particularly Jesus forsaken on the cross, which is an element of the spirituality of the movement from which New City Press really grows out of and seeks to bring to our culture. And you mentioned our motto you had up there, and I just want to take a moment just to draw out 3 particular words that are meaningful to what we do: unity, encounter, and dialogue. These 3 words are really kind of what we hope makes us distinct and helps us bring something of real value to the church and to the culture. And it's also what those 3 words, I think, as you hear Jimmy speak, you'll really understand why we were so excited when Jimmy approached us about his book on the immersion experience and on really the spirituality that can really help people get the most out of those experiences of immersion, and the opportunity to foster encounter with other cultures and a deep dialogue of civilizations. So we're really anxious to give things over to Jimmy, but we did just want to take a moment to express our appreciation and to let you know a little bit more about New City Press. But with that, I am going to hand it over to Jimmy, who has been active in Catholic education for over 15 years and is now a theology teacher at Gilmore Academy. So over to you, Jimmy. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you very much for the wonderful, kind introduction, Greg and Dr. Clark. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and to speak as part of the webinar series. We'll say a few more words about the book towards the end, but certainly the comments that I'll be making come from the writing in the book and the ideas contained in it. I want to also thank Kat Rankin, my former student from Gilmore Academy, who is now a sophomore at the University of Kentucky. Kat will be giving her perspective, a student perspective, after my comments, and I'm very grateful that she was willing to take time out of her schedule, her busy college schedule, to join us today. And finally, I want to thank all of you for attending. There are many things that you could be doing on a Thursday night that are not watching a webinar. I know many of you have probably sat in front of a computer for most of the day as faculty, as staff, as students. And so it's not lost on me that you are willing to sit in front of a computer for another hour in an evening at a busy time. And so thank you so much for taking the time to join us. I really appreciate that, and I hope it's time well spent at the end of our discussion. I hope you feel that it's time well spent. So as Dr. Clark mentioned, on this feast day of Blessed Basil Moreau, I thought it would be appropriate to kind of frame the context of my reflections on the book and on immersion programs around Father Moreau and his thoughts on this day. And so in his document, Christian Education, Father Moreau writes, "Zeal is the great desire to make God known, loved, and served, and thus to bring knowledge of salvation to others." Moreau is writing in this document talking about what it means to be a good Christian educator, and zeal is one of the examples that he gives. And I hope that not only in adapting this framework, but that you'll see by the end of the comments tonight that immersion work can also kind of give an insight into what it means to be a good Christian educator. And so I hope that our discussion comes full circle by the end. And so this evening, I would just like to make 3 main points and then to kind of go off from there. I'm going to put those points in the chat because I know there are some people who are visual learners, but I don't have any fancy slides because they're just 3 points. But if you need to refer to them at any time, they're now present in the chat. The first one, when engaging in service, we should reflect on our previous narrative. The second point, solidarity is a process and not an end product. And third point, we are called to honor our experiences of service by letting them transform our lives. And so again, these are the 3 points that I'll refer to as we're moving through our discussion tonight. First point, when engaging in service, we should reflect on our previous narrative. And so in order to reflect on a previous narrative, I'm going to share with you a previous narrative. When I was a resident minister at John Carroll University a number of years ago, I was offered the opportunity to participate in a program called Labra. And Labra is a group that meets once a week on Friday evenings and takes food and fellowship to those experiencing homelessness on the streets of Cleveland. And I had never done anything like this before. In high school and college, I had never done a whole lot of service. So this was all very new for me. And even though I was a resident minister and supposed to be one of the adults kind of chaperoning and going, it was for me a very eye-opening experience, very transformative, and really pushed me outside of my comfort zone to do something like this. And so as I recall my narrative and thinking back, I remember heading out with the students in the van, and there are two vans, one that goes to the east side of Cleveland, one that goes to the west side. And I remember sitting there and really being nervous and thinking about, what was going to happen, how was this going to go. And so I remember we parked under a bridge, and there was an encampment of a number of people experiencing homelessness all across this area, very large area under a bridge. And one of the people in charge called me over and he said, hey, could you take these hot dogs to that guy that's sitting over there? And, feel free to make conversation with him and sit with him and talk with him about how his day was going. And so it was a very cold night in Cleveland, November, December evening. And I was shivering and I was walking over and I was nervous. I'm very much an introvert. And so I was nervous talking to someone that I didn't know. And so as I approached the box where this man was cold and huddled and trying to keep warm, I kept asking myself, what am I going to say? What am I going to say? And then when I handed him the hot dogs and he reached up, and there was this moment of human connection where I forgot in that moment the reality of being afraid to talk to him in the cold outside. And he said, thank you. And I said, you're welcome. And I don't remember what we talked about, but we spoke for a few moments. And then as I was walking away, it again hit me again what was going on and the reality of this, that this man lives in this place. And here was I going back to the dorm where I was living, and a fancy nice apartment dorm, and that I had heat and I had access to food anytime I wanted it. And so all these things are whirling around in my mind. And when you're riding back in the van, I kept thinking about this and the image of his face and the reality of the difference of his life versus mine and what that means. Words like sadness and anger and guilt and uncertainty were the things that, if I had to now look back on what I was experiencing, those are the labels that I would give to that experience. I begin with this story for a couple of reasons. First, I like to call these kind of stories boy with bread moments, which is drawn from the experience of Father Pedro Rupe, former Superior General of the Jesuits, who had an experience of encountering the hunger of a child for the first time. And Father Rupe later reflected on this, and he said that was such a monumental moment. He was in medical school, and he was walking on the streets of Madrid, and there was a young boy sitting on the side of the road who just had a small piece of bread to eat. And Rupe would write about this and say he remembers the face of this child because it was the first time he had an encounter with the hunger of a small child. And so I refer to these again as boy with bread moments, kind of in the spirit of Rupe in my research work. And so I ask all of you who are watching this evening, do you have a boy with bread moment? Do you have an example of injustice that you return to when you say to yourself, why is it that I'm passionate about this cause or that cause? Why is it something that stirs my heart when I see in the news that certain groups are marginalized or certain people are pushed aside? And boy with bread moments can be things that you have experienced yourself, perhaps some sort of bias or bullying or discrimination based on any number of factors, something that you experienced and you said to yourself, for the first time in my life, I feel different because of this reality based on who it is that I surround myself with, the school that I go to, the friends that I have. What is that experience that has caused you to realize what injustice really is? For some people, it might be something like reading a book or watching a movie. For some people, it might be having difficult conversations. But I think for those people who are really passionate about justice issues, social justice causes, there is some sort of foundational moment where you realize the thing, that which it is. And so again, that was the first reason that I mentioned the story. The second is I think that these experiences can often become anchors for us in our work for social justice and to accompany others. Because often people come back from immersion programs or service experiences and they're really passionate and on fire with the reality and they want to share it with people. And then the first person they talk to, they're like, you know what, this actually happens, or people actually experience this. And then the first person they talk to is like, yeah, that isn't a big issue, or why would you waste your time with those people? Or, why don't you figure out what really is going on here instead of being brainwashed about this issue? And those can be very defeating times and experiences when people take something that we're passionate about and want to make a difference in the world, and then they really deflate all that energy. And so I think that analyzing and looking at our own narrative of experience and asking ourselves, where do this drive to work for justice come from, I think can be very important in those difficult times where we're not supported in that work. And that having these experiences kind of labeled and reflected on in our own narrative of experience can be incredibly helpful. And so we can also ask ourselves, as we reflect back, where was God working in the reality of these difficult moments? And I certainly don't mean, and I don't believe in a God who causes people to suffer, causes people to be hungry, causes people to experience homelessness and these other horrible realities and discrimination. That's not what I'm saying when I say, where was God? I'm saying, where was God in that moment that I became angry and that I realized that here's a person experiencing something that I've never had to deal with? How is God, how is the Spirit working in my life to draw from that experience in a way that I can more align my actions with those of the gospel? How is it that God, the Spirit, is nudging me to be more like Christ in a way that I can bring justice to the world or to the experience of those who are marginalized or experiencing some sort of difficulty based on any number of factors? Similar to the beautiful story in the Gospel of John, where the man is given sight and he says, I was blind and now I see. In what ways are we blind to these realities? And in what ways has God nudged into the fabric of the human experience to open up our minds to the realities of things and people, things that are going on that we don't often realize? So that was my first point. When engaging in service, we should reflect on our previous narrative and give anchor to our work for justice, and also give inspiration and space for the Spirit to propel us forward, to nudge us to open up new boundaries of possibility. My second point, as it says, solidarity is a process and not an end product. I think solidarity is certainly one of the core components of Catholic social teaching, and I think it can be one of the most misused, or at least as I look back at my own experiences, I think I misused it a lot in my youth. So one of the destinations that I took a number of students to for immersion work is Immokalee, Florida. And if you aren't familiar with Immokalee, I invite you to watch the documentary Food Chains. A very powerful look at this beautiful, complex reality of this migrant farm working town in Florida. When I first went to Immokalee, I told students in preparation, I said, we're going to go and spend a week learning about the migrant workers and living in solidarity with them. And what young Jimmy meant by living in solidarity was the fact that we're going to have simple meals, 2 meals a week. We're going to be living in a church, sleeping on air mattresses. For showering, we had a hose, and we kind of showered off in the parking lot. And so my understanding at the time of solidarity was we're going to live more simply. And because the migrant workers didn't have all these opportunities, by kind of divesting ourselves of these, we would be in solidarity with them. I think it's kind of akin to if you're going to take a group of students to a soup kitchen, telling them, don't eat breakfast today. So that way, when you're helping to serve food to folks who are hungry, you have a little bit of hunger and you'll be in solidarity with them as you're serving food. While I think that there can be a lot of positive benefits to denying ourselves of things and to living more simply, I don't think that the label of solidarity really fits to what it is that I'm describing. I think Pope Francis says very well in Evangelii Gaudium, the word solidarity, Pope Francis writes, is a little worn and at times poorly understood, but it refers to something more than a few sporadic acts of generosity. It presumes the creation of a new mindset, which thinks in terms of community and the priority of life of all over the appropriation of goods by a few. And so I'll share another story in terms of how my transformation of this word solidarity occurred. A few years after what I was describing in terms of my work in Immokalee, I was talking to one of the former volunteers of a program called Rostro di Cristo, which is based in Boston and sends young college alums to Ecuador to live amongst the poor, to minister and to accompany them. And so I was talking to this woman who had just returned from Ecuador, and I said, what was it like living in solidarity with the Ecuadorians? And she thought for a moment and then pulled out her passport from her purse, and she held it up and she said, "This is the difference between me and my Ecuadorian neighbors that I was living alongside of." And she said, "If at any point I was injured, I could have left the country. If at any point I didn't want to continue in this experience, I could have come back to my previous way of life." And she said, "I chose to live in Ecuador amongst the people for a year. The people living there didn't choose to live in this situation." And she said, "I don't really think I was in solidarity with them at all." And that really struck me. And I thought about it for hours that evening. And I thought, well, if she wasn't living in solidarity with the Ecuadorians, and she lived there for a year, and she learned Spanish, and she was eating their food, and she lived a very simple lifestyle, if she didn't believe she was in solidarity with them, then how in the world could my students that I'm taking to Immokalee for a week, just because we're sleeping on air mattresses, be in solidarity with the people of Immokalee? And so I really wrestled with this idea. And solidarity is part of the dissertation that I wrote, trying to get to this understanding of solidarity. And so while this is incredibly low tech, I'm going to draw you a very quick picture to help explain the conclusion that I came to about solidarity. And so this is, I know very little about math. This is really all I remember from Algebra 2. But I'm going to plot a few points here and create what the power of mathematics will call an asymptote. And so really what you have to know is that these lines will never intersect. This line that I've charted will continue on for infinity, but never reach this other line. This is what I think is solidarity. When I say it's a process and not an end product, that we grow slowly in solidarity with someone if we choose to, and if we're invited to. And I think that there are many other layers that we can talk to you about solidarity in terms of that invitation and the importance of being invited to grow in solidarity with someone. But for the moment, we can just assume that the invitation is given and that one wants to grow in solidarity with the reality of another person. And so let's say, hypothetically, this point is me as I'm entering college, and I know very little about, and I'll pick an example, people experiencing homelessness, as I talked about with the LABRA program. And so here, maybe you see in a movie people living on the streets, and you say, okay, I can intellectually know what that is, but I don't have a connection to it. And maybe here you read a book as an undergraduate talking about the reality of living on the street. And maybe here you have a guest speaker. And then maybe here you do something like that LABRA program that I mentioned. And here you say to yourself, I'm going to go on an immersion trip. And then you say, well, I'm going to spend a year or more in postgraduate volunteer service. And then you say, you get the point. And so I think that as we have these experiences, we may come to a deeper understanding of the reality of what it means to fill in the blank. In this case, the reality of what it means to be living on the streets. But as long as I have the opportunity to go back to my home, as long as I have, as the young woman held up her passport, as long as I'm able to return to that reality, I can never meet this line. In other words, I don't fully know the reality of that experience. And I think it goes even deeper than service experiences. One of the most difficult things that is often said out of kindness is, I know what you're going through. And yet it can be one of the most difficult things for someone to hear. I don't think we ever really know what someone else is going through. I think that twins who grow up in their, in the same home and who have the same experiences don't really know what the other twin is going through. And so if we can say that about people that we grow up with, people that we know perhaps better than anyone else, how could I possibly, and with a genuine authenticity, say to someone who is having a completely different life experience that just because there's a touch point on the graph where we have a similar experience that I know what they're going through. And so all that to say, solidarity, again, as a process and not an end product, that if we're lucky enough to be invited into that experience and to say, thank you humbly for helping me to understand the reality of what it is that you're going through and who you are, your circumstances, your life circumstances, because we are all different. We all have our own story. And that was one of the beautiful things that I realized in doing my research for my dissertation, is the reality of solidarity as not something that we're striving like to get to the end in a race to get to the finish line, but something that we enjoy and experience and kind of grow together in that beautiful invitation. Finally, point number 3, as I said, we are called to honor our experiences of service by letting them transform our lives. I would again like to offer a story for this. A number of years ago was on an immersion program with John Carroll University, working with their Boulder School of Business. And we were partnered with a group called Hope for Honduran Children, who kind of ran the experience for the John Carroll students. And I was offered the invitation to accompany as kind of lead reflection for the John Carroll students. And on one of the final days, we were heading up into this mountain, pretty far away. It was the village that we visited that was the furthest from where we were staying. So it took a long time to get there. And as we were ascending up this mountain, there was a man who was walking up the mountain, and the people in charge said, "Oh, pick this person up. We know who he is. He's headed to the same place we are." And this man, who I later learned his name was Mancho, got onto the bus and he was speaking Spanish to the folks in front. So I wasn't really sure what was going on or who he was at the time. And so we arrive at this village, and Mancho gets off and he goes into the school. And those running the experience for us said, "Oh, he'll come back and tell a little bit of his story after we're done walking around the village." And so we walked around, and there was a translator with us that was translating, and she was explaining some of the realities of living in this place. And we came back to the school on our way leaving, and Mancho came out, and the kids came out from the school, and through a translator, he was telling us some of the stories about the reality of what he was doing. And we eventually realized that this man hadn't been paid for 3 months of work. And we were also told that, as he was walking up this mountain, that he makes this walk, which is over an hour, makes this walk 3 times a week. And he ascends this mountain because his family lives at the base of this mountain. And he ascends up, and he, for 3 days a week, he ends up going up this mountain, teaching these kids for the morning and then walking back down. And so one of the John Carroll students said, "What gives you hope? What pushes you to do this when you haven't been paid, and you have to walk an hour up a mountain and back down in the extremely hot heat?" And he thought for a moment, and again through a translator, he said that earlier, a few months prior, he had gone to Tegucigalpa, the capital of Honduras. And while he was there, he saw one of his former students who was a clerk in one of the stores. And he said, "That's the reason that one of these students could escape the poverty of Honduras, poverty of this village, and have an opportunity for a job, have an opportunity for life." And he looked around and he said, "Most of these kids won't have that opportunity. But if what he is doing makes a difference in just one of these child's lives," he said, "all of it is worth it." I was so moved by that story. This was the spring where I was finishing my dissertation and preparing to be interviewing for jobs and teaching jobs. And I was just so compelled by that this man who truly gives and doesn't count the cost, doing everything he can for his students, not worrying about financial gain, not worrying about how tired he would be walking up and down this mountain, but tirelessly does this 3 days a week in the hopes that just one of these young people can escape the poverty that we saw. And so I, being so moved by this, told myself that if I become a teacher, if I'm able to get a teaching job, that I want to always remember the experience of Mancho, because he calls me to be a better teacher. He calls me to focus on my students and to always put them first and to care about their experience above anything else. But what a powerful story. I think, and it reminds me of a story about Father Moreau that I heard recently, that during a time of prayer, he approached the tabernacle and knocked on the door of it. And he reflected after doing so that Christ is a prisoner of the tabernacle. In other words, the interpretation being that Christ doesn't want to stay there, but wants to be let loose into the world. That when we accept the Eucharist, when we say amen, and we ingest the Eucharist, that we take on the Spirit of Christ, and that we are called to sending forth, called to go into the world and to bring Christ to the world. And I think that's a beautiful image for me of what Mancho is doing, that he's kind of sacrificing that which we would all say, money and time are things, and he's going into the world and challenging me as someone who heard his story to then spread that message to the world the importance of education, the importance of care for people who are being marginalized, for these young kids that really will, many of them, not have a chance to do the things that I've been able to do, and that so many students at our schools in the States are able to do. So being inspired by Moncho and that call of Christ to become the educator, the best educator that I can be. So in a moment, I'm going to invite Kat to share her kind of response and synthesis of some of these thoughts from her experience as a student that went on immersion programs. But I just want to quickly mention that I realize that some people watching this haven't had the opportunity to do immersion work because of the pandemic. And so I think that while my comments and the book are geared towards immersion work, that any form of service that we are doing at our schools can fit into these points. The understanding of knowing our narrative, the importance of talking about solidarity in appropriate ways, and then how do we honor our experiences. And immersions are very powerful, and some schools are starting to do them. High schools and colleges are starting to do them again this year, and some are still waiting. I've heard colleges and high schools that are both in a mix of those. And so hopefully we all hope for a time when the pandemic subsides so that we're able to engage in this important work again. But I think that since in many places it's being paused, that this is an excellent time for us to say, how is it that we can do immersion work more justly in a way that doesn't marginalize those who we encounter? Similar to in the medical field, the Hippocratic Oath of not doing harm. I think immersion programs, in the same way you go into a place, at the very minimal, we should say when we leave it, we have done no harm. And I think that that's the baseline benchmark for how we can go into immersion work. But with that, I would like to introduce Kat, who's going to talk for a few moments about her experiences, and then I'll give a very quick final comment at the end, and then we'll have some time for some questions. So take it away, Kat.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Minkhouse, for inviting me to speak. Again, my name is Kat Rinken, and I'm a student at the University of Kentucky studying middle school education. I first met Dr. Minkhouse when I was a student at Gilmore Academy. He was my theology teacher, and it was in high school that I had my first experience on an immersive service trip. My sophomore and junior year of high school, I was lucky enough to go to Nuevo Paraíso in Honduras. And Nuevo Paraíso is a community of homes and schools and activity centers that serves and caters to over 100 children. And our job was to bring donations to provide manual labor and support for their renovations and upgrades of their facilities, and to build community with the kids. And that was obviously my favorite part. And my experience in Honduras was all I talked about after my first trip until my second one, and is something that I still take the opportunity to talk about at any given point today. And so I never saw an immersion or service work as a bad thing. It had never even occurred to me that it could be in a negative way. Until one day, a few months into my senior year, an Instagram account tried to follow me called Abolish GA Mission Trips. And after seeing this, I was infuriated. And as I looked over their posts and explanations, trying to play detective to figure out who in the world would have ever bashed something that was such a big part of my life, the biggest point that they made was that you don't have the right to take photos with random impoverished children. You don't have the right to grow emotionally close to them for a week and abandon them a week later. It's damaging to their minds. And this really hit home for me because I had grown to deeply love these kids and the staff and the tias, the house mothers, and the construction crew, anyone that I had met. And I was really upset. I was worried. I questioned, was I causing them more harm than good? And I was so upset that I ended up going to visit one of my teachers and our trips leader, Martha Liggis, for advice. And she read through the Instagram posts and she was really honest with me. She said that some of these were really valid. Some of the points were very true or could be. And so her advice to me was to take some time and put myself in the shoes of the kids. She asked me, what was it like to be hungry? If I knew, what was it like to be really hungry, and to be in a classroom with 20 other students that weren't my age, that were in various stages of schooling, to share a house with 12 other children who weren't necessarily blood related to me, to meet large groups of people, new people every few months, who had all the luxuries of the world and who would bring me toys and clothes and let me play with their fancy phones and cameras. And as soon as I would start getting close to them, to have them leave and to never see some of them again. And so I spent a lot of time reflecting on these questions. And I think that that would have been a time when it would have been really beneficial for me to have Dr. Makehouse's book, so that I could have been properly prepared and challenged to make sure that I was immersing myself for the right reasons and that my heart posture was right, and that I had spent time in solidarity, truly understanding what it meant to be in the shoes of those who we were serving, and that I was doing it for the glory of God and out of genuine love. And so my senior year, our trip to Honduras was canceled 4 days before we were to leave due to COVID-19. And as you can imagine, I was very upset, because I knew it was going to be one of my last chances to see my Honduran friends before going off to college. And I panicked a little bit because my senior project was supposed to be surrounding my mission trip. And but most importantly, I was really distraught because I wouldn't have been able to put into practice the research and the realizations and the adjustments that I had made in preparation for this immersion. So I'm just very thankful to Dr. Makehouse again for inviting me to speak tonight and for giving me the opportunity to share this with you guys. And yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Make.
Thank you, Kat, for your reflection. I'd like to mention that Kat was one of the earliest people to read the first chapter of the book. After she graduated that spring, I had finished the first chapter, and I sent it to her, and I said, "Hey, I know that you love Honduras. You used to talk about it all the time and your experiences there. Could you read this and let me know if this speaks to your experience, if this kind of challenges, some of the things that you were doing and the ways that you thought, but does so in a gentle way that can help you think through some of these things." And she, read the first chapter, and I was very grateful for that. And she wrote back and said, "Yes, I think this is really applicable to someone who is either in high school or in college and who's doing these sort of experiences, to challenge her and others to see things in a new way," as she was saying, asking herself, putting herself in the place of those kids that she really formed a connection to, about how this could be helpful or could be damaging to people. And so I think, as I mentioned, with our opportunity to reflect on immersion work and service trips, to asking ourselves really, what are the pros and cons? And I really appreciate and love immersions. They have really formed a lot of the ways that I understand and see justice. So I'm a huge fan of them, but I think that anything can be done poorly and anything can be improved as we continue to ask ourselves, especially in the wake of all that we've seen in the past few years in the pandemic, the racial awakening that we've experienced since 2020, and a greater understanding of the importance of racial justice and the conversations around that as we're trying to embody what it is that our mission statements say at our institutions. And so I think that asking these difficult questions really fulfills the title of our presentation and our discussion this evening: Making God Known, Loved, and Served with Immersion Zeal. And before I hand it over back to Dr. Clark for a Q&A, I want to honor my friends at New City Press and say a little bit about 30 seconds or so about the book that is the title of a lot of these reflections. The book is divided into 6 different parts. The first one, similar to our discussion of narrative this evening. The second part on prayer and discernment. How do you decide whether it be postgraduate volunteer work or immersion work? How do we invite God into that conversation about how we're called to work for justice? The third part on volunteerism, and the savior complex. A little bit of what Kat was getting at in her comments. How do we, again, enter into these communities justly in a way that honors the reality of another and doesn't further marginalize the people that we're there to accompany and to learn from in a humble way? There's the next part is on solidarity, which should be no surprise given my comments on solidarity, and there's a much deeper unpacking of that in that section. There's a section on suffering. How do we grapple with and understand what it means to observe and experience suffering as we are going on these experiences, and seeing the reality of life that might be very different from our own, And again, how do we invite God into the conversation about the suffering that we may witness? And the final section of the book is on honoring our experiences of service and immersion. What are healthy ways to do that? And what are ways that, again, can perpetuate the injustices and the marginalization that we see? And so that's a little bit about the book. I think it's time for me to turn it over back to Dr. Clark. And if there's any questions, he can facilitate those. So thank you so much for listening. Again, I appreciate that you're here at a time when you could be elsewhere, and that you're sitting at a computer at a time when probably you've been doing that all day. So thank you so much.
Well, terrific. Dr. Metcalf, thank you. And Kat, thank you as well. And to certainly our friends at New City Press for, again, co-hosting tonight's event. First off, Dr. Metcalf, I want to thank you for sharing your scholarship, for sharing your experiences, for sharing your passion. Certainly Gilmore Academy is lucky to have you there, as is John Carroll, and all of us this evening, blessed by what you have shared, inspired by what you've shared. And so again, I thank you for that. And Kat, I really want to thank you too. You know, you showed a vulnerability in your reflection that I think is so important for us to see and experience. And it's something that, you know, the good teachers that you have there at Gilmore Academy help you along to understand better, you know, why you were feeling the way that you were, and how maybe next time to do even better. So thank you. Just really a terrific night. We do want to let people know that this video will be made available tomorrow. Okay, so we'll send out this video tomorrow. But we do have a couple of questions. I have two questions actually that I've been thinking. And the first one is for Dr. Metcalf. The second one I really would like to ask of Kat. So Dr. Metcalf, so if I'm a school campus minister or theology teacher and I'm interested in creating an immersion program, what kind of suggestions would you make, right? Where does one begin? Are there programs out there that we should look to? You referenced a couple of them, I believe, that host immersion trips. So could you just give us some advice on what steps a school might take?
It's a great question, Dr. Clark. Thank you. I would say specifically, I can offer a few kind of general philosophical questions that I think are important. First, are you partnering with people that really know the experiences of people on the ground? And on the ground could mean in your own city. It could mean a partnership with a group who you know, is working just down the road from your school, but is an opportunity for an immersion or immersive experience, which could be, you know, a few hours a week, or it could be a day or a week-long trip or something like this. So I would say, for me, one of the primary things that I am encouraging people to look at is how well does the partner really know the experiences? What, you know, are you taking people to a place to kind of put a check in the box that you built something or did something, but then when you leave, it's just kind of cycling through and doing the same thing over and over again? Or are you really meeting a community need in a way that honors the reality of where you are and challenges people to enter humbly? I'd say the second thing is on preparation. And this is, again, I've never had such a role. I've worked with people and created an immersion for a classroom experience. But I think that the preparation experience is one of the areas where both at college and high school, campus ministry and teachers as well, asking ourselves, are we giving the tools to our students to really understand what it is that they're entering into? Whether it be, you know, some rudimentary knowledge of language, rudimentary knowledge of the history, of the reality of where they're going, some of the things that they will see. One of the things that I really appreciated when I taught the class on Immokalee is that I was able to spend 6 weeks of class with the students, and then we went at spring break on the experience, and then we had 6 weeks after to unpack. And while I know that at many, you know, campus ministries, high schools and colleges, you can't spend that much time. The question for me is, you know, are you creating a process of education and then empowerment? And then kind of, I'd say the third thing, is there a process in place to take what it is that you learn and apply it somewhere on your campus or at your school? And, you know, perhaps you are working with a population in a place and in your city, there isn't really that population. Is there some way you can make a connection so that students see that a a lot of the justice work is interconnected in a way. If you're working with migrant workers in Immokalee, perhaps you return to Cleveland and you say, well, there aren't many migrant workers here, but we do have a lot of refugees. And so maybe that student group can be then empowered to spend time with refugees to continue the learning process. So simply off the top of my head, I'd say those are three things that we're looking at. Who are the people that know things best and realize that we as an outsider never know the experience of an insider better than they do? What is the preparation before, and what is the empowerment to continue kind of that education for justice at your campus or in your city that follows? So I'd say those are three things that I have heard other people tell me are really important.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I think that as you mentioned, the preparation before, the empowerment, the opportunity to reflect, a safe space to be vulnerable, right, after these experiences, so that it's not a performative action, right? It's truly working towards solidarity and seeing the face of Christ. As I once heard Bishop Curlin, the former bishop of Charlotte, North Carolina, and previous to that in Washington, D.C., in a conversation he had with Saint Mother Teresa, in his own fear and serving and ministering in Calcutta, she said, let the Jesus in your heart see the Jesus in their heart. Really profound. That quote really has a profound impact on me. So Kat, thank you again. And so my question for you is, we as Catholic educators, we seek, at least we should seek, to create cultures of encounter, right? Cultures of encounter with others, cultures of encounter with the living Christ. And those, through those cultures of encounter, we're transformed, right? And so I wonder if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about how your Honduran experience transformed you as you begin now. You're in your second year of college. You're thinking about what your life will look like after college. Part of our goal as Catholic educators is that you'll live vocationally, right? That you'll live, your human flourishing will be for the greater good of the world, right? So how did this transform you, right? You shared how the negative experience of the Instagram post that you saw, how that moved you and how your teacher helped to guide you through that. But also I would guess that this had pretty profound impact on you. So maybe if you would share on that for a moment. And then we invite people to drop questions into the chat. I'll narrate or I'll moderate them. We do have a couple of minutes to field those questions. Kat?
Yeah, I think Honduras was by far like the best experience still, even though I think that obviously the Instagram post did take me time to pause and think and reflect on it. But overall, yes, most definitely one of the most positive experiences of my life. And I think that Honduras is part of the reason I decided to become a teacher, because I saw how much I saw firsthand how much like an education can really impact a child's life. We saw kids at all ages who were being served there, but also we got to travel to Tegucigalpa, to the capital, and see some of their secondary home placements, and how kids who had already aged out of Nuevo Paraíso, what they were doing with their lives. And so, and that was they said partly in due to the education and the love and the life that they had been able to receive from living in Nuevo Paraíso. And so, yeah, part of the reason I'm becoming a teacher is because Honduras really taught me the importance of education in general. And also, I just think that Honduras taught me the importance of just genuine kindness, because there's not been a more happy, loving group of people that I've ever met than these people that, are supposedly living an impoverished life, but have so much joy and love for people. And so I think that they've really inspired me to be a kinder and nicer and more grateful, gracious person every single day. As cliche as that sounds, but they truly they love unconditionally, and it's very contagious, and something that I really have tried to bring forward with me every single day.
Fantastic. Thank you. And as we were talking about before the webinar began, we hope that your pursuits to be an educator will be in Catholic education someday. So we hope you come join us. Well, thank you again, Kat. And again, I want to compliment both you and Dr. Menkhaus. It's clear that the last 2 years of doing Zoom classrooms, that both of you are pros on the camera. Excellent job. We really want to thank you for being as well prepared tonight as you were. Again, as a reminder, New City Press has offered us a 25% discount to purchase this book. I know that I am in the process of ordering it right now as we speak. And so thank you, Greg and our friends at New City Press for this kind offer, for this very generous offer. And as we have throughout the year focused on this theme with the Holy Cross Institute, of forming citizens for this world and for heaven. We've been intentional about the principles of Catholic social teaching and really the intersection of those principles of Catholic social teaching with the mission of Holy Cross. And then as well, looking at how we respond with these principles to address the needs of the modern times. And so we'll continue the webinar series. I'll talk about next month's in just a moment, but I do want to call your attention to and invite you, all are welcome, to the annual Holy Cross Institute Convocation, which will happen this year on the campus at St. Edward's University in person. We are fortunate to have a really stellar lineup of keynote speakers who will speak thematically on our vocation as Holy Cross educators, as Holy Cross, specifically as Holy Cross Catholic educators, and what an institution, what a Holy Cross institutional vocation looks like. That will be our first two speakers, and Father Tom O'Hara and Dr. Julianne Wallace. And then Father James Heft and Carrie Robinson will look at the challenges of the new evangelization and disaffiliation in the church, and what it is that we can do to address those, especially in cultivating faith in youth. And so we're delighted to have Dr. Heft, or Father Heft, and Carrie Robinson. And then many of you are familiar with the work of Chris Lowney. He wrote a book called Everyone Leads: How to Revitalize the Catholic Church. That's one of many of much of what he's written. He as well will be talking about those efforts, those steps that we can take. And again, keeping in mind that the goal of Holy Cross education from the very beginning was the restoration and the transformation of the church and society. And so as we are faced with these challenges of today, we believe that Catholic education is the answer to that transformation. And then the last, but certainly not least of the speakers is Gloria Purvis. Many of you are familiar with Ms. Purvis's work. Gloria is just internationally known, but especially, James, as you talked about this racial awakening, right? And what we have seen in our country, the racial injustices and the awareness raising that we in our schools have made. It's somebody like Gloria Purvis that's helped to elevate all of our consciences. And she's going to speak more about racial justice, and we'll be joined by a committee of Holy Cross educators to talk more about the work that's being done on racial justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion in schools. So all are invited. By the way, it's free, and you pay for your travel and accommodations to come to Austin, Texas. Several of these will be recorded and made available later. I've been getting the question if they'll be live streamed or not, but at this point, we're committed to an in-person, safe experience here on the campus at St. Edward's. So you can see that there's a link there to register for that. Next slide, please. Next month's webinar will feature Mr. Kyle Balarta, who is a trustee here at, thank you, Jimmy, for dropping your contact info into the chat there as well for anybody that wants to follow up directly with you. So Kyle Balarta is a venture capitalist here in Austin, a graduate of St. Edward's University, but equally impressively is his commitment to those principles of Catholic social teaching and the Holy Cross mission. He is a founding partner of the Laudato Si Challenge and is a member of the founding patron council for the Humanity 2.0 initiative in collaboration with the Dicastery for promoting integral human development within the Vatican. Kyle served as a sustainable finance coordinator for Pope Francis's Economy of Francesco that produced economic proposals for the Holy See. And so he'll be our guest presenter for next month's webinar, which you can see is featured there. Next slide. And then we also want to call attention to our friends, our partners at the Holy Cross Associates, whose annual conference will be taking place on January the 29th. It is a Zoom conference, so you'll be able to join that, and it is offered for free as well. So there's information if you're interested in the content being offered through the Holy Cross Associates. We thank the Holy Cross Associates for continuing the legacy of Holy Cross, of our founder, Basil Moreau, with other lay and religious administrators, family members, faculty, staff, students across the country. Next slide. And as we always do, we appreciate any feedback that you might have for us. So if you could take a moment, we'll leave this up on the screen for an extra minute, but if you could take a moment to complete for us the evaluation, we really do appreciate your feedback. And of course, we invite you to visit us on our website, as is listed there. If you have any questions or anything that we can do to serve or support you and your school community, please don't hesitate to reach out. Our offices are traveling again. We've been making lots of school visits and giving presentations and meeting with faculty and staff and student groups, and we look forward to more of that in the year ahead. As we mentioned at the outset, if you're interested in getting our newsletter, you can subscribe to that at the link that's now in your chat. And then as well, we appreciate any financial support that you might be able to provide for the Holy Cross Institute. So with that, we want to bid you farewell tonight on this feast day of Blessed Basil Moreau. I'm getting ready to go to St. Ignatius Martyr Catholic Church, where Father John Doherty and Father Felipe will be singing Vespers this evening at St. Ignatius Martyr here in Austin, Texas, in celebration of Blessed Basil Moreau's feast day. And as I like to close all things that we do, let us remain disciples with hope to bring. Thank you, Dr. Menkhaus. Thank you, Kat. Thank you, New City Press. Thank you, our team from the Holy Cross Institute. And thank you to my colleagues at St. Edward's University. Let us remain disciples with hope to bring. May God bless you.